The first snow of the season fell in silence over Ridgefield, Colorado, but Officer Tyler Brennan was not watching the sky. He was on one knee on the wet sidewalk outside St. Anselm Regional Hospital, one gloved hand pressed against the ribs of a German shepherd who would not stop staring at the revolving door. "Come on, boy," Tyler whispered. "She would hate to see you like this." The dog did not blink. For 11 straight days, Duke had not moved from that square of concrete. Before we go any further, drop a comment and tell me what part of the world you're listening from. And go ahead and hit that subscribe button so you don't miss stories like this one. Tyler pushed himself up slowly because his knees were older than they used to be, and he stood there with the snow catching on the shoulders of his uniform jacket and looked at the dog he had known since the day he was a puppy. He had been at Megan Ashford's little kitchen table on Cedar Loop the morning she brought Duke home in a cardboard box, 8 weeks old and stumbling, one blue eye slowly turning brown. He had watched her train the dog for 2 long years, whispering to him in a mix of soft English and quiet hand signals that only the two of them understood. And now, on this sidewalk, none of what Tyler knew mattered, because Duke was not looking at him. Duke was looking past his shoulder, past the yellow rope the hospital had strung around a small area of grass, past all of it, at the sliding glass doors of the trauma wing, waiting for a woman to walk back out the way she had gone in. 2 weeks earlier, on a bright fall afternoon on Larimer Street, everything Duke had ever been trained to do had ended in less than 1 minute. It had begun as a nothing call. A man in a gas station parking lot was frightening customers, waving a length of pipe around, refusing to leave. Officer Megan Ashford had been on shift with a rookie named Marcus Hale, 6 weeks out of the academy, 23 years old, with the wide, steady eyes of a boy who still believed the uniform meant what it said on the recruiting poster. Duke had been in the back of the cruiser, panting quietly, tags jingling every time the vehicle turned a corner. They arrived with the sun in their faces. The man in the parking lot dropped the pipe as soon as he saw them. He raised his hands. He said without shame that he had not eaten in 2 days. Marcus, being a rookie, walked toward him first, because that was what he had been taught, to close the distance and calm the moment. Megan followed 1 step behind, her hand near her holster, but her voice already soft, already reaching for the tone she used to talk people down. Nobody in the parking lot saw the second man. He came from behind a delivery van on the far side of the lot, moving fast, and the first sound anyone heard was not a shout, but the crack of a small handgun going off twice in quick succession. Megan saw the muzzle before she saw the face. She saw Marcus flinch and start to turn the wrong way, the way a boy who has never been shot at turns his head toward the sound instead of away from it. She had less than a second to decide, and in that second, she did the only thing she had ever really known how to do. She stepped in front of him. The bullet went through the meat under her collarbone, glanced off the top of a rib, and lodged near the base of her right lung. She did not fall right away. She turned her head. She looked at the back of her own cruiser, where Duke was already up on all fours, teeth bared, a low sound rising from his chest that Marcus later swore he had never heard any dog make before or since. Megan crawled behind the parked delivery truck with Marcus dragging her by the shoulder strap of her vest, and there, with her cheek against cold asphalt and blood pooling under her jacket, she whispered a release command that only Duke would recognize. It was 2 syllables, quiet, calm, the exact tone she used at the end of a long training day. She wanted him to run back to the cruiser, to stay behind the metal, to be safe. Duke heard the command. Duke understood the command. Duke did not obey the command. He ran, but he ran the other way. He ran toward the sound of his person's voice. And by the time the second responding unit arrived on the scene, Duke was pressed against Megan's side with his head across her stomach and his nose pushed against her jaw. And he would not let anyone near her until Marcus, sobbing openly, whispered the dog's name and told him she needed to go on a ride to see the doctor. Duke stood up then. He walked with the paramedics all the way to the ambulance. He tried to jump in. They pushed him back gently because dogs are not allowed in the back of an ambulance, and he stood in the middle of Larimer Street with the fall sun on his fur and watched the vehicle drive away with the woman he had spent every day of his life protecting. They found him 3 hours later on the front sidewalk of St. Anselm Regional Hospital, sitting perfectly still, watching the revolving door. Nobody knew at first how he had gotten there. It was more than 4 miles on foot from the parking lot to the hospital. Marcus later checked the security footage from the pet supply store across from St. Anselm, and there was Duke at the edge of the frame, trotting steadily down the sidewalk with his tail low and his ears forward, stopping only once at an intersection to let a school bus pass. He had followed the scent of the paramedic's jacket, or Megan's blood, or the specific chemical smell of the trauma stretcher. Nobody could say for certain. What everyone could say was that from the moment he sat down on that patch of concrete, he did not leave. For the first 2 days, the staff thought he would wander off on his own. He did not. On the 3rd day, the hospital's security guard, a kind older man named Ray Delgado, tried to walk him to the police cruiser Tyler had parked at the curb. Duke let Ray put a leash on him. Duke walked with him as far as the cruiser door. Then Duke sat down and would not move. Ray, embarrassed, took the leash off. Duke walked on his own back to the exact square of sidewalk where he had been sitting, and he lay down again, chin flat on the cement, eyes on the door. By the 5th day, people were starting to notice. A local news van showed up. A woman in a bright green coat filmed a short segment about the police dog who was waiting for his wounded handler. And by that evening, the video had traveled well beyond Ridgefield. People from 3 towns over were driving in to leave things on the sidewalk: a bag of dog food, unopened, a tennis ball, a card with a child's handwriting that said, "Please get better," a stainless steel bowl of water that froze overnight in a thin sheet. Duke did not eat the food. He did not touch the ball. He drank a little water when Tyler brought a fresh bowl in the morning, and only then. That was when the memos began. The hospital's administrator was a tired woman in her early 60s named Deborah Larson, and she was not, in her heart, a cruel person. She had run St. Anselm for 11 years, and she had a stack of complaints on her desk that she could point to. A woman with a small child had been afraid to walk past Duke. A visitor with a service dog of his own had said his dog would not go near the front entrance. A member of the hospital board had called her personally to ask what she was doing about the situation, in a tone that suggested she had been ignoring it. She sent a memo to the Ridgefield Police Department. She sent a second one, longer and more formal, the following week. She sent a third one, curt and legal in its language, on the morning of the 11th day, which was the morning Tyler Brennan had come out to try one more time. He had brought Megan's old training glove. It was a heavy leather thing, chewed at the fingertips, that had once been used to teach Duke how to bite gently on cue. It smelled still of her hand. Tyler held it out. Duke lifted his head. He looked at the glove for a long moment, and then he looked at Tyler, and there was something in the dog's brown eyes that Tyler had never seen in any dog before, a kind of quiet weight, as if Duke were trying very hard to make him understand something without any of the words a person would use. Duke lowered his head. He thumped his tail once against the concrete. He did not move. Tyler sat on the sidewalk for another 20 minutes after that. He rubbed the space between the dog's ears the way Megan had always done. He said, out loud, to nobody in particular, "She's still in there, big guy, she's still in there." Then he stood up, brushed the snow off his knees, and walked back into the hospital to speak, for the 3rd time that week, with Deborah Larson. He did not know that Dr. Nathan Reed was watching him from the 2nd-floor window of the doctor's lounge. Nathan Reed was 38 years old and a trauma surgeon. He was the man who had opened Megan Ashford's chest on the night she was brought in, who had reached with his gloved fingers around the outside of her lung and found the bullet nested against a nerve and made the decision, in less than 10 seconds, to leave it where it was rather than kill her trying to pull it out. He was, by the reckoning of most of the nurses on the 7th floor, the reason she was still alive. He was also a man who had not spoken to his own father in 9 years and who kept a photograph of a black Labrador named Gus in the top drawer of his desk, next to a stethoscope he had inherited from his mother. He watched Tyler Brennan walk into the lobby with the leather glove still hanging from his coat pocket, and he set down his cup of coffee and he took the stairs down to the ground floor, 2 at a time. He did not go to Deborah Larson's office. He went outside. He sat on the curb next to Duke, and he did not try to touch him. He was quiet for a long time. He looked first at the sliding doors, and then at the dog. He noticed the way Duke's ears turned faintly every time a gurney rolled past inside the lobby, tracking a sound most people could not have heard through the glass. He noticed the way Duke's ribs showed through his coat. He noticed the way the snow was collecting on the dog's back and how Duke did not shake it off, because to shake it off would have meant looking away from the door. Nathan Reed took a small piece of a granola bar out of his coat pocket. He held it out on his flat palm. Duke did not look at it. Nathan set it down on the concrete near Duke's front paws, next to a small pile of other food that people had left. He said softly, "I know. It's not the right smell. She'll come. Give her time." Then he went back inside, and he did not go to his office, and he did not go to see his next patient, though there were 3 of them waiting. He went to Deborah Larson's office, and he sat down across from her without knocking, and he said, in the plain professional tone he used with families in the worst hour of their lives, that in his medical opinion, the animal on the front sidewalk was part of the care plan of Officer Ashford in room 714, and that removing him would represent, in his view, a clear risk to the patient's recovery. He offered to put it in writing. Deborah Larson looked at him for a long moment. She was a tired woman, and she had that morning buried a friend from her nursing school days. She said, without much feeling in her voice, "Then put it in writing, doctor." He did. He walked upstairs, sat at his desk, and wrote a letter of 1 paragraph on hospital letterhead, and he signed it, and he brought it back down and set it on her desk. She read it twice. She folded it in half. She placed it in the top drawer of her desk, next to the resignation letter she had been writing for herself, and she said, "Nothing will change today. I will speak to the board this evening." That evening, in a conference room on the 4th floor, the hospital board took 21 minutes to decide that Duke could stay on the sidewalk for as long as it took, provided he did not enter the building. They voted 7-2. The 2 who voted no were both members of a family that owned a large parcel of land adjacent to the hospital, and their reasons had less to do with the dog than with a parking expansion they had wanted for 18 months. But Megan Ashford, upstairs in room 714, did not know that any of this was happening. She had woken from the coma on the 9th day, and she had not spoken for the first 36 hours. When she finally did speak, it was to ask, in a voice that was more air than word, whether the rookie had made it home. The nurse, a woman named Alma Torres, who had been on the trauma floor for 22 years, said yes, that Officer Hale was fine, that he had come by every single day, that he had left a card and a small blue paper crane on her side table. Megan turned her head very slowly and looked at the crane. She said nothing more that afternoon. The next morning, a physical therapist came in, a bright young man with a clipboard and a kind, tired smile, and he explained that they would need to begin, gently, with the muscles in her legs. Megan looked at him. Megan looked at the ceiling. Megan said quietly that she was not going to be doing any therapy today, or tomorrow, or any day after that. The physical therapist did not argue. He had done this job for 6 years. and he knew there were mornings when the fight was not in the room. He said he would be back tomorrow. She did not eat her lunch. She did not eat her dinner. When Nathan Reed came in on his rounds that evening and asked her gently whether there was anything he could bring her from outside the hospital, anything at all, she looked at him and said in the same paper-thin voice, "I need you to understand. I'm tired. I'm so tired. And my legs will not work. And I can't be a canine handler in a chair. So please do not talk to me about therapy. I am done." Nathan Reed sat down in the chair beside her bed. He did not touch her. He said, "You have a visitor outside." She did not ask who. She had stopped asking about visitors. Her sister Paige had come every day, and the answer was always the same, that she was tired, that she did not want to talk. Nathan Reed did not push it. He said only, "When you're ready to see who it is, tell your nurse. He'll wait as long as you need." He did not tell her who was outside. He did not use the word dog. He left the room. Megan Ashford lay very still and looked at the ceiling tiles. She counted the little holes in one of them. She had done this many times as a child in a doctor's office, waiting to be told what was wrong with her mother, and it had always given her something to do with her mind while the rest of her held very still. She counted 78 holes. Then she closed her eyes. She did not tell the nurse anything. The next morning, the physical therapist came in again. She sent him away. The morning after that, he came again. She sent him away again. On the fourth morning, she did not have to send him away because Paige Merritt was already in the room. Paige was Megan's older sister by 4 years, a fifth-grade teacher at Ridgefield Elementary, a woman who wore cardigans in 3 shades of grey and cut her own hair with kitchen scissors, and did not, as a rule, put up with self-pity in her students or in her family. She had let Megan alone for 4 days out of respect. She was not going to let her alone for 5. She sat down on the edge of the bed. She said, "Get in the chair." Megan said, "Paige, please." Paige said, "Get in the chair, or I will get you in it." Megan looked at her. She saw that her sister was not going to move. She saw, too, that her sister was crying a little, silently, without any effort to hide it, and this was not something Paige did easily. Megan did not have the strength to fight her. She let Paige and a nurse move her into the wheelchair. She let them wrap a blanket around her legs. She said very quietly, "Where are we going?" Paige said, "Just downstairs." She wheeled her out of the room. She wheeled her down the long corridor. She wheeled her into the elevator and pressed the button for the ground floor. Megan sat in the chair with her hands folded in her lap and her eyes on the floor tiles, and she did not ask any more questions because she did not care. Paige wheeled her past the lobby. She wheeled her out the side entrance so that they could avoid the main visitors and the news camera that was sometimes there. She wheeled her all the way around the outside of the building, and when they came around the corner to the front sidewalk, Paige stopped the chair. She knelt down beside her sister. She turned the wheelchair to face the building. She said, "Look up." Megan raised her head. The first thing she saw was the sky, grey and heavy with more snow. The second thing she saw was the yellow rope the hospital had strung around a small area of the sidewalk. The third thing she saw, inside that yellow rope, was a German shepherd rising slowly to his feet, on legs that had grown thin from waiting, his fur dull, his eyes fixed on her face, with a recognition so complete and so quiet that Megan's whole body seemed to stop working all at once. Duke did not bark. Duke did not leap. He took 3 careful steps forward, and then 3 more, and then he was standing beside the chair, and he lowered his big warm head into her lap, and he pressed his nose against the inside of her wrist, the way he had done every single night since he was a puppy, on the couch in the little house on Cedar Loop, when it was just the 2 of them, and the television, and the sound of the wind against the windows. Megan pressed her face into his fur, and she made a sound that was not a word, and was not quite a sob, and she cried in a way she had not cried since the shooting, since long before the shooting, in a way she had not in truth cried since her mother's funeral 13 years earlier. She cried into the dog's neck, her shoulders shook, and the small crowd of people that had gathered on the sidewalk, the ones who came every day to leave a bag of food or a tennis ball, the news camera woman in the bright green coat, a delivery man who had stopped his cart, Ray the security guard, and Nathan Reed, who had come out onto the front steps because he had a suspicion about what Paige was doing. All of them went very quiet, and none of them moved. They let her have that moment. They understood that they were not part of it. Duke did not move either. He stayed with his head across her lap for a full 7 minutes. Megan kept one hand on the flat of his skull, between his ears, and the other hand deep in the fur of his neck, and she talked to him in a voice too soft for anyone else to hear, and Duke, who did not speak in words, answered by pressing closer. When Paige finally wheeled her sister back inside the hospital, Megan spoke to her for the first time in 4 days. She said, "Bring the therapist. Tomorrow morning. I'll try." That was the first turning point. But the hospital was full of walls, and only one of them had been knocked down. The next morning, the physical therapist came in, and Megan let him move her legs. She could not lift them. She could feel her feet, faintly, and she could wiggle the toes on her left foot but not on her right, and the therapist smiled at her when the left toes moved, as if she had just recited an entire poem in a foreign language. He said, in the careful voice therapists use, that this was very good news. Megan did not believe him, but she let him keep working. Every morning after that, Paige came at 7 o'clock and wheeled her downstairs so that Duke could see her fighting. Paige had made an agreement with Ray the security guard, and with Deborah Larson, and with Nathan Reed. And the terms of the agreement were that Duke would remain on the sidewalk, but would be allowed to walk beside Megan's chair down the long ground floor corridor for 20 minutes each afternoon, as part of what Nathan had officially written up in her chart as companion animal presence, therapeutic. He had used those exact words because they were the words that had appeared in a research paper he had read 3 years earlier at a conference in Denver, and he was not above borrowing an academic tone if it would get a large working dog past a hospital administrator. Duke walked beside the chair. He did not stray. He did not sniff the walls. He kept his shoulder against the wheel and matched his pace to hers, exactly, the way he had done on foot patrol for 2 years. When Megan grew tired and closed her eyes, Duke stopped. When she opened her eyes again, Duke moved forward. He seemed to know, without being told, that she was learning to move again, and that his job now was not to run ahead or hang back, but to be exactly beside her, always. For a week and a half, this was enough. Then everything came apart. It was Marcus Hale who caused it, though he did not mean to. Marcus was 23 years old, and he had, since the shooting, been unable to sleep more than 4 hours at a time. He came to the hospital every day. He brought the small blue paper crane. He brought a second one, then a third, and by the end of the 2nd week there was a whole row of paper cranes on Megan's side table, and Megan had not asked him about them, and he had not told her. He came into her room on the 12th day of her recovery, sat down in the chair by her bed, and asked, in a voice that was very careful and very small, whether she remembered what the second man in the parking lot had looked like. Megan said, "Marcus, I don't want to talk about that day." Marcus said, "I know, I'm sorry, but I need to tell you something." He told her very slowly that the man who had fired the 2 shots had turned out to be a person named Kevin Boyd, 31 years old, that he had been arrested that same night at a motel outside town, that he had been in and out of the county jail for years on small charges, and that he had, until 3 months ago, been the boyfriend of the sister of the first man in the parking lot, the man with the pipe. Marcus said this in the flat tone that rookies use when they have rehearsed something 20 times. He said the 2 men had planned it together, the pipe and the panic and the ambush from behind the delivery van, that they had been trying to rob a bank on the other side of town and had lost their nerve, and had decided instead to take a police cruiser, and that they had thought the two-officer response would be handled by whichever officers were nearest. He said the whole thing had been in the newspaper for a week, and that Nathan Reed had asked him not to bring it up until she was stronger. Megan closed her eyes. She said, "That's not the something you need to tell me." Marcus was quiet for a long moment. He said, "You knew Kevin Boyd. You arrested him twice years ago when you were on patrol on the north side. Both times you let him walk to a diversion program because you thought he was a kid who could be turned around. He said in his statement to the detectives that he had recognized you across the parking lot. He said he had waited until you turned your back on him. He said he had picked you on purpose." Megan did not open her eyes. Marcus said, "I'm telling you because it wasn't random, and I'm telling you because everyone else was going to keep it from you, and I don't think that's fair. You gave people chances. It wasn't your fault that a man used your kindness against you." He got up. He put his hand on the rail of her bed and then took it off because he did not know if she wanted him to touch her. He said, "You saved my life." Megan did not open her eyes for a very long time after he left. When she finally did, she looked at the row of blue paper cranes on her side table. She counted them. There were 13. She looked at the ceiling. She counted the little holes in one of the tiles. There were 78. She did not cry. She lay very still and thought about a small, skinny boy of 20 years old that she had once bought a hamburger for in the parking lot of a taco stand on Federal Boulevard, because she had arrested him for stealing car radios, and he had looked in the back of her cruiser like nobody had fed him in 3 days. She thought about the way he had eaten the hamburger without saying thank you. She thought about how she had told him, in what she had believed was a firm and kind voice, that she did not want to see him again in the back of her car. She thought about how, apparently, the last time she had ever seen his face, he had been raising a small handgun toward the back of a 23-year-old rookie. She did not do therapy the next morning. She did not eat. Paige came at 7 o'clock. Paige said nothing about therapy. She wheeled her sister downstairs, out the side door, around the building, to the sidewalk. She said, "Look up." Megan looked up. Duke rose slowly and came to her. Megan put her hand on the flat of his skull and cried without making any sound, and Duke stood very still and let her cry into his fur, and Paige stood behind the chair with her hands on the handles and did not say a single word. That was how it went some mornings. The days when Megan could not carry the weight, she came outside and Duke carried it for her. But there was a limit, and the limit was Duke's own body. He had not been eating enough. He was thinner than any of them had realized under the coat. On the 18th day after Megan had first come outside to see him, on the 30th day since he had first arrived on the sidewalk, Ray Delgado came out at 6 in the morning to find Duke lying on his side, breathing in a way that was too shallow and too fast, unable to stand. Ray ran. He ran into the emergency lobby, and he shouted for Nathan Reed, who was upstairs in a meeting, and he shouted for anyone, and a nurse who had grown up on a ranch outside Grand Junction came running out with a stethoscope and knelt on the sidewalk and pressed it against Duke's chest and listened. She said, in a voice that was very calm and very serious, that his heart was moving too fast, that he was dehydrated, that he needed a veterinarian now. Ray called Animal Control. Animal Control was 30 minutes away. Ray hung up. He picked up Duke, who weighed 30 pounds less than he had 2 months earlier, and he carried him in his own arms 3 blocks down the street to the Riverside Veterinary Clinic, because he had once had a beagle that had been treated there, and he remembered the address. The veterinarian, a woman named Dr. Eleanor Marsh, looked at Duke and asked no questions. She put him on a table. She started an IV. She said, without looking up, that they needed to call the family, Tyler Brennan got the call at 7:15 in the morning. He drove to the vet clinic. He stood in the small waiting room with the smell of disinfectant and stared at the linoleum floor. He did not know how to tell Megan. He did not know what he would say to her. He had watched her recover for a month on the strength of a dog who had waited for her. And now the dog was in the back room with a tube in his leg and a heart that was too fast. And Tyler Brennan, who had once been the calm one on a shift, felt something rise in his throat that he could not swallow. He called Paige. He said, "Do not tell her yet. Give me an hour. Let me know what the vet says." Paige, in her kitchen, with a piece of toast in her hand that she had not taken a bite of, said, "Tyler, she will know something is wrong the minute she goes downstairs and he isn't there." Tyler said, "I know. Give me an hour." Dr. Marsh came out at 9 o'clock. She was a small woman in blue scrubs with dog hair on the shoulders. She said, "He's stable. We're rehydrating him. His organs are fine. He's malnourished, and he's exhausted, and he needs to eat, and he needs to rest, and he needs to be somewhere he can smell her, because I have never seen a working dog do this to himself over a separation. I want to keep him here for 48 hours, and then I want him with her." Tyler said, "She's in the hospital. There is no way the administrator is going to let a dog into the trauma wing." Dr. Marsh looked at him. She said, "Then you convince the administrator, or he is going to do this to himself again the moment we put him back on that sidewalk." Tyler drove to the hospital. He did not go to Deborah Larson's office. He went to Nathan Reed. He told him what the veterinarian had said. Nathan listened without moving. When Tyler finished, Nathan stood up, and he walked, and Tyler walked with him, and the two of them went to Deborah Larson's office, and they knocked on the door, and they went in without waiting for her to say, "Come in." Deborah looked up. She said, "Dr. Reed." Nathan said, "The dog is dying, Deborah." Deborah put down her pen. Nathan told her in one long sentence that did not stop for punctuation that Duke had collapsed on the sidewalk that morning, that he had been carried 3 blocks in a security guard's arms to a veterinary clinic, that the veterinarian believed he was killing himself by proximity, that the only medicine any of them had for this animal at this point was to bring him into the room of the woman he had been waiting for, and that if the hospital board wanted to write up new rules about it later, he would sign anything they put in front of him, but that today they were going to bring the dog upstairs. Deborah Larson did not speak for a long time. She was, as it happened, holding in her left hand a small silver medal on a chain, one she had received from her mother on the day she graduated from nursing school 40 years earlier, and she had, without noticing, been turning it between her fingers throughout the conversation. She looked down at the medal. She looked up at Nathan. She looked at Tyler. She said, "You bring him up the freight elevator at night after visiting hours. You bring him in a service dog vest. You bring him only to the 7th floor. Do not bring him to any other floor of this hospital under any circumstances. He does not go into the pediatric wing. He does not go into the oncology wing. He is on the 7th floor with Officer Ashford, and he is nowhere else. If he causes a single complaint, we revisit." Nathan Reed said, "Understood." She said, "Get out of my office." They got out. 2 days later, at 9 o'clock in the evening, Ray Delgado wheeled a large soft crate into the freight elevator of St. Anselm Regional Hospital, and inside the crate was a German shepherd wearing a red vest that said "Service Animal" in white letters, and Ray pressed the button for the 7th floor. Nathan Reed was waiting for them. He walked them down the corridor. He opened the door of room 714. Ray opened the crate. Duke walked slowly out. He was thinner than he had been the last time Megan had seen him, but the veterinarian had gotten him rehydrated and had convinced him to eat 2 small meals in 24 hours by feeding him from her own hand. He looked around the room. He saw Megan. She was sitting up in bed. She was wearing a pale blue sweater that Paige had brought from her house on Cedar Loop, and her hair had been washed for the first time in a week, and she was looking at the door with an expression that was somewhere between hope and disbelief. Duke crossed the room in 5 soft steps. He put his front paws up on the edge of the bed. He did not jump. He knew better than to jump. He waited. Megan patted the blanket beside her. Duke climbed onto the bed. He curled up on her left side, the side away from the wound, with the whole length of his body pressed against hers, and he laid his head on her chest, gently, the way he had done every night in the little house on Cedar Loop. Megan wrapped her arm around him. She said, in a voice that was thick and low, "You crazy dog. What did you do to yourself? What did you do?" Duke did not answer, because he was a dog, and dogs do not answer with words. But he sighed deep in his chest, and Megan felt his whole body go loose against her, and for the first time in more than a month, Duke fell into the kind of sleep that his body needed. He slept for 6 straight hours. Megan did not move the whole time, because she did not want to wake him. She fell asleep herself at some point, with her hands still deep in his fur, and Alma Torres, the night nurse, who had been on the trauma floor for 22 years, came in to check the IV and looked at the two of them and turned around and walked out without adjusting a single thing, because she was not, she said later, going to be the one to interrupt that. That was the second turning point, and after that, everything moved faster. Duke began to sleep in Megan's room every night. Ray brought him up in the freight elevator at 9 and took him back down to a small kennel in the security office at 6 in the morning. During the day, he waited on the sidewalk, but he ate now because he knew he would see her, and he drank the fresh water Tyler brought him, and his coat began to fill out again. Megan began to do her therapy without being asked. Her right foot moved on the 21st day, the smallest twitch of the big toe, and the physical therapist, whose name was Dr. Marsden, whooped so loudly that a nurse 3 rooms over came running to see if there had been an emergency. But the story was not over, because there were still walls, and one of them was inside Megan herself. The wall was Marcus. She had not really spoken to him since the day he had told her about Kevin Boyd. He had come to the door 3 times. Alma Torres, gentle but firm, had told him that Officer Ashford was resting. On the 4th day, he had stopped coming. She had heard from Tyler that he had put in a request to transfer to a different division, that he had told the sergeant he did not think he was fit for patrol anymore, that he was thinking about leaving the department entirely. She had heard from Alma that his mother had been calling to check on him. She had, in her own mind, been avoiding him. She could not, she thought, look at his face without seeing the fraction of a second in the parking lot when she had stepped in front of him. She could not look at him without seeing Kevin Boyd's face behind him, seeing the muzzle of a small gun that Kevin Boyd had chosen because it was cheap and easy to hide. She could not look at Marcus without her whole body remembering the exact weight of the fear that had made her decide, in less than 1 second, that she would rather be the one to feel the bullet than let a boy who was still learning how to hold a radio be the one. On the 28th day, Duke was on her bed in the late afternoon, chin on her thigh, watching the door. Someone knocked. Alma opened it a crack. Alma said softly, "Marcus is here. Should I ask him to come back?" Megan looked down at Duke. Duke looked up at her. His tail moved once against the blanket. Megan said, "Let him in." Marcus came in slowly. He was not in uniform. He was wearing a grey hooded sweatshirt and jeans and boots that had salt stains from the sidewalks, and his eyes were red, the way a person's eyes are red when they have been crying quietly for weeks. He sat down in the chair. He did not know where to put his hands. Megan said, "I have not been fair to you." Marcus said, "You don't owe me anything." Megan said, "Marcus, I have to tell you something. I have thought about it a lot, and I have to say it out loud, because if I don't say it out loud, I am going to spend the rest of my life turning it over in my head. What happened in that parking lot was not your fault. It was not Kevin Boyd's fault, though he will pay for it, and I hope he will. It was not my fault either, though I keep trying to hand myself the bill. It was the shape of that particular minute of that particular day, and if I had it to do again, I would do it exactly the same way. I would step in front of you 1,000 times before I would let you turn the wrong way at the sound of a gunshot. Do you understand me?" Marcus was silent. He nodded once, he nodded a second time. He put his face in his hands. He cried, without noise, for about a minute. Duke got up from his place on the bed, and he walked, on soft feet, to the foot of the bed, and he sat down there and looked at Marcus. He did not go to Marcus. Duke had a person, and his person was in the bed, and he was not going to leave her side. But he looked at Marcus in a way that Marcus later said was one of the strangest and kindest things he had ever felt an animal do, as if the dog was standing witness for both of them. When Marcus lifted his head, he said, "I put in for a transfer." Megan said, "Take it out." Marcus said, "I can't do it. I'm scared, Megan. I flinch every time a car door slams. I don't sleep." Megan said, "I know. Marcus, I know. Take it out anyway. Not because you have something to prove to anyone. Take it out because I want to know that on the day I put my uniform back on, whether it's from a chair or from my own 2 feet, you are going to be at that first briefing. Take it out because you are the best rookie I have ever ridden with, and I am selfish, and I want to work with you again. Do it for me if you can't do it for yourself. And when you can do it for yourself, do it for yourself, not before." Marcus looked at her for a long moment. He said, "Okay." He took his phone out. He wrote a message to his sergeant. He showed it to her before he sent it. It said, "I am withdrawing my transfer request, effective immediately. Thank you for being patient." She nodded. He pressed send. He stayed for another hour. They did not talk about the parking lot again. They talked about his mother, and about a bad joke his training officer had told at the academy, and about a diner on Broadway that they both liked. And when he stood up to leave, Megan said, "Come back tomorrow." He said, "Okay." He came back tomorrow. He came back every day after that. He brought a 4th crane and a 5th, and after a while he stopped counting. The story was not over, because there were still walls, and one of them was Deborah Larson. Deborah Larson had begun, in the middle of the night sometimes, to walk down to the 7th floor of her own hospital. She did not go into room 714. She stood at the door, in the yellow half-light of the corridor, and she looked through the small window, and she watched the shape of a dog curled against a woman on a hospital bed. She did this 3 times, 4 times, over a period of 2 weeks, and each time she went back to her office, and she sat down at her desk, and she took out the resignation letter she had been writing for herself, and she read it again. She had written the letter after her husband had died, 4 months before Duke arrived at her hospital. She had not told anyone that she was thinking about leaving. She had not told anyone that she had spent the past 8 months coming to work at 7 in the morning and going home at 9 at night because there was no reason to go home earlier, because the house on Fillmore Street was too quiet, and the dog they had owned together, an old black Labrador named Milo, who had died 3 weeks before her husband did, was not there to meet her at the door. She had not told anyone that the reason she had been so angry about a large working dog on the front sidewalk of her hospital was not the visitors, or the memos, or the board. It was that every time she walked past Duke, she thought about Milo, and she thought about the face of her husband, and she thought about a whole life she had lost in a single season, and she did not know what to do with any of it. On the night of the 35th day, she stood at the door of room 714 for the 5th time. Duke lifted his head. He looked at the window. He met her eyes through the glass, and he did not growl, and he did not look away. He just looked at her, steadily, the way he had looked at Nathan Reed on the day Nathan had first sat down on the curb beside him. Then he laid his head back down on Megan's chest, and he closed his eyes, and Deborah Larson stood at the door for another 2 minutes, and then she walked, slowly, back to her office. She sat down at her desk. She took the resignation letter out of the drawer. She read it one more time. She folded it in half. She tore it, slowly, into 8 pieces. She dropped the pieces into the recycling bin. She sat there for a while, looking at nothing in particular. Then she picked up the phone, and she called the office of a woman she had known 30 years ago in nursing school. The friend she had buried some weeks earlier, the woman's daughter now, and she asked whether the family had ever found a home for the 2 rescue dogs the woman had been fostering. The daughter said no, they had not. They had been calling shelters. Deborah said, "I'll take them both." She hung up. She turned off the light. She went home. 2 weeks later, when Megan Ashford was well enough to sit up in a wheelchair for a full hour without becoming exhausted, Deborah Larson came into room 714 with a folder under her arm and sat down in the chair by the bed and said, without any preamble, "Officer Ashford, I owe you and your dog an apology. I would like you to know that the hospital board has voted unanimously to establish a working animal accommodation policy, effective immediately, for the family members of active duty first responders and long-term patients. It will not, of course, undo the 6 weeks that your dog spent on my sidewalk, but it will mean that no other family will have to fight for what you fought for." Megan looked at her. Duke, on the bed, thumped his tail once against the blanket. Megan said quietly, "Thank you, Miss Larson." Deborah stood up. She said, "You are welcome. And Officer Ashford, when you leave this hospital, I would like it to be through the front door, and I would like the dog to be beside you, not the freight elevator, not the side entrance, the front door, whenever you are ready." Megan nodded. She said, "I would like that too." The next hurdle was called the walking parallel bars. She had begun, in the 5th week, to be able to stand for a few seconds at a time between the bars, with a therapist under each arm. In the 6th week, she took her first step. In the 7th week, she took 3. Duke was allowed by special permission from the physical therapy department into the therapy room, on the condition that he stay on a mat by the door. He stayed on the mat. He watched. Sometimes, when Megan's face went pale with the pain of it, and her arms began to shake against the bars, Duke would rise from the mat and take one careful step forward, and then stop and look at her, as if to say, "I am here. Keep going." She would keep going. The doctors could not explain entirely why she was getting stronger. The bullet was still lodged near her lung. It would be there for the rest of her life. But the muscles in her legs were remembering something they had forgotten for 2 months, and her right foot was, slowly, learning to hold weight again. And Nathan Reed, who was not a man given to explanations that did not fit into a chart, told her one afternoon that the human body was capable of more than the medical literature could account for, and that he suspected the reason had 4 paws and was currently asleep at the foot of her bed. Megan smiled. It was the first time Nathan Reed had seen her smile, and it made his throat close up in a way that surprised him. He went back to his office and took the photograph of Gus, his black Labrador, out of the top drawer of his desk, and he set it on the desktop where he could see it, and he did not put it back away. There was one final setback. There always is. In the 8th week, Megan caught pneumonia. It hit her fast in a single night. Her scarred lung filled with fluid, and her fever climbed past 103. And she was moved back into the intensive care unit for 4 days, and the walking she had done so painfully for 2 months seemed, in the space of 1 night, to have been given back. Duke was moved back to the sidewalk. Ray tried to keep him fed. Duke ate a little, but not much. He did not lie down. He stood in the same square of concrete as before and stared at the door. On the 2nd day of the pneumonia, Paige came to the hospital and stood outside room 714. Nathan Reed came out. She said, "Tell me the truth." Nathan said, "If we get past the 3rd day, she'll be all right." Paige said, "And if we don't?" Nathan said, "We are going to get past the 3rd day." They got past the 3rd day. Megan's fever broke on the fourth morning, and she opened her eyes and asked for water and asked for her dog, in that order. And by that afternoon, Ray was walking Duke back up the freight elevator, and Duke was back on the bed with his head on her chest. And Megan was crying softly and telling him she was sorry, that she had scared him again, that she would try harder, that she would not do it again if she could help it. Duke, who did not speak in words, sighed once and did not move for the rest of the night. The rest is quicker to tell. By the 10th week, Megan was walking to the door of her hospital room with a cane. By the 12th, she was walking the length of the corridor. By the 14th, she was doing 3 laps of the 4th floor walking track, with Duke in his red service vest at her hip. By the 5th month, she had been discharged from inpatient care and was living for the first time in half a year back in the little house on Cedar Loop, with Duke and with a live-in physical therapist that the department had paid for, and with Paige coming by every evening with a casserole in a covered dish, because Paige did not entirely trust her sister to eat if left alone with a microwave. Kevin Boyd was sentenced in a Ridgefield courtroom that Megan attended in her wheelchair to 22 years for attempted murder of a police officer. His first accomplice, the man with the pipe in the parking lot, was sentenced to 7 years for conspiracy. Megan did not speak at the sentencing. She had been asked whether she wanted to. She had said, "No, thank you." When Kevin Boyd looked at her from the defendant's table, she looked back at him steadily, and she did not smile, and she did not glare. She looked in that moment more like the officer who had once bought him a hamburger than like the woman he had put in a wheelchair. He looked away first. Marcus Hale did not transfer. He stayed on patrol, and in the 6th month he was assigned, on a temporary basis, to work with Officer Tyler Brennan. And Tyler took him under his wing, the way Megan had taken him under hers. He was not, he would tell people later, the same rookie he had been on the day of the shooting. He was quieter. He listened more. He was, in the opinion of everyone who worked with him, a better officer for it. He came to Megan's house every Sunday for dinner. He brought Paige a new pair of oven mitts once as a joke, because the old ones had a hole in them, and Paige had laughed harder than she had laughed in a year. Dr. Nathan Reed adopted a black Labrador puppy from the local shelter 3 months later. He named her Gus, after the dog he had lost when he was a boy. He and Deborah Larson, on a Tuesday afternoon that neither of them had planned, ended up in the hospital cafeteria at the same time, and they ate their lunches together, and they talked about their dogs, and they talked about their spouses, and it turned out that Deborah had known Nathan's mother 30 years earlier on a rotation in Denver, and they sat there for an hour talking about a woman that Nathan had thought no one else at the hospital had ever met. He walked back upstairs afterward with his eyes wet, and he did not know what to do with himself, and he called his father that night for the first time in 9 years, and his father cried into the phone and said only, "I was hoping you would call today." They did not fix everything that afternoon, but they started. On a bright spring morning in the middle of April, Megan Ashford walked out of St. Anselm Regional Hospital on her own 2 feet. She was using a cane. She had her physical therapist behind her at a distance in case. She had Paige beside her, one hand on her arm. She had Marcus and Tyler in uniform by the door, and Nathan Reed and Deborah Larson standing on the front steps, and Alma Torres holding open the door with tears running down her face without any apparent embarrassment, and Ray Delgado wearing his security uniform with the buttons polished. She had a small crowd of people on the sidewalk, the ones who had left the tennis balls and the cards and the bags of dog food, the woman in the bright green coat with a news camera, a delivery man who had once stopped his cart to watch her cry into the fur of a dog, a school bus full of 5th graders from Paige's class who had somehow been let out for the morning. She walked slowly from the revolving door to the sidewalk. She walked to the exact square of concrete where Duke had waited for 11 days, and 30 days, and 40 days. She stopped there. She turned. She looked back at the doors. Duke was beside her. He had walked on his own 4 feet right at her hip, exactly the way he had walked in the corridor 100 times, matching her pace. He was in his red vest. He was healthy. His coat was thick and shining. He was looking up at her patiently, waiting for the next thing she was going to do. She reached down. She put her hand on the flat of his skull between his ears. She said softly, so that only he would hear, "Good boy, let's go home." Duke did not need to be told twice. They walked together off the hospital grounds and down the sidewalk toward the police cruiser Tyler had parked at the curb. Tyler opened the back door. Duke jumped in first, and then he turned and looked at Megan, and Megan smiled, and she sat down beside him. The door closed. Tyler got in the driver's seat. Paige got in the passenger side. They drove, slowly, out of the hospital lot, past the sidewalk with the yellow rope that was no longer there, past the small area where a large working dog had once refused for weeks and weeks to look away from a set of glass doors. The story could stop there. But there is one more thing worth telling. 6 weeks after Megan came home, Deborah Larson sent her in the mail the small silver medal on the chain with a note in careful handwriting. The note said only, "I do not have a daughter to leave this to. I would like it to belong to someone who understands what it means to keep going when nothing in you wants to." Megan wore it from that day on under her uniform. And one afternoon in the summer, when Duke was lying on the porch in the sun at the little house on Cedar Loop, and Megan was sitting beside him on the top step with a cup of coffee and no cane in her hand because she did not need one anymore, she looked down at him and she thought about a piece of leather glove and a granola bar on a curb and a freight elevator at 9 o'clock at night and a small blue paper crane on a hospital-side table, and a woman standing at a door in the middle of the night looking through a small window at a dog. And she thought out loud, so that only he would hear, "You saved my life, you know." Duke sighed, deep in his chest, and did not open his eyes, because he already knew. If this story touched something in you, do me a favor and leave a comment about the animal that has meant the most to you in your life, and give this video a like, and go ahead and subscribe to the channel so you can hear more true-to-life stories like this one, because there are more of them out there than most of us ever realize, and they are worth telling.